All right, so in this video, I'm going to show you sort of the steps that you should be going through and the things you should be thinking about when you're thinking about making a sort of more complicated model, especially what you should be thinking about in terms of how I'm actually going to build this thing and getting the design right so that you don't sort of trap yourself and give yourself a whole bunch of extra headaches when you're making it. So this is something I've been working on this evening. It's just a cute little biplane. It's kind of sort of stout. It's got a little pilot over here. And one of the things that you might notice is that none of it is really joined together, right? And I've done that on purpose because if I haven't joined anything together, it makes it much easier to pull stuff apart. If you have joined everything together in a model, well, you can always go up here and click ungroup, and that will let you split things apart. And that might be handy, but there are other ways to sort of deal with cutting a model up and changing a model and things like that. So don't stress too much if at this stage you've stuck some stuff together. Now, what I'm going to do is I want this center part of the plane, that I want to be 3D printed. This propeller, I probably want to be 3D printed as well. And I actually want that propeller to spin. So I'm going to put a little electric motor in the nose of this plane so that this propeller spins. And the wings and the tail, I want to laser cut because that's going to be really much faster and also let me produce things that would be really challenging with the 3D printer. So I'm at this stage, and what I want to show you is, okay, well, I'm going to do some laser cut parts. You'll notice there's also a plane hiding out on the side. That's so that if I stuff anything up, I've got a backup copy over here. I'm going to look at these wings and go, okay, how am I going to sort of make all this out of laser cut material and join this together? And I might just move this plane back and out of the way a little bit more. So I've got this center brace, and what I want to do is I want to just sculpt it away so that it looks a little bit more sort of like a brace or like it's supposed to. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to take some triangular cutouts from that brace. And so I need a triangle shape, and this one will work just fine. So I'm going to flip that into the orientations that I want. So I've got this little rotation arrow here. Whoop. Click on that and drag like this. Now, if my mouse is inside this circle, then I drag it in nice little steps like that. If I'm outside the circle, I can drag it in single degree increments. So I want to turn it exactly 9 degrees, so I'm going to do that. And that's a good place to start. So let's move it up and move it across. And notice how I'm moving my camera view so that I can move this really precisely into the locations that I actually want to move it into. And I need to make that a bit smaller. Whoop, wrong dimension. And let's make that a hole. All right, so that's a good place to start. I'm going to copy that, Control C, and paste it, Control V. And I am going to flip that. And instead of dragging it up and doing a 180-degree rotation, I've got it selected. So I'm just going to select mirror up here. And if I select mirror, I get some options for mirroring. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to flip it up and down. Here we are. So that's going to flip that for me. And I'm going to move that up the top and across. And I'll make a copy of that one. I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees and I'm going to put it in the middle there. I might change its size some. And just playing with the dimensions until I get it looking sort of how I want it to look. Yep, pretty much spot on. And copy it and make one more. Mirror it again. And I'm just going to move that over there like that. And what do I need to do? I think I need to make those just a little bit smaller in order to make that look right to my eye. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to select all of these shapes by holding down Shift while I click on them all. Select this shape and combine those all together. All right, and that is going to give me something that looks much more like a brace. So that's much more in keeping with my design. And I would like that, well, I want a bunch of them. And so I will make a bunch of them by copying and pasting. But before I do that, I don't want to just glue this edge to this wing. That's not a very strong way of joining things together. It's also not a very easy way to assemble it. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do a thing called I guess you could call it a mortise and tenon joint or a finger joint. And I'll show you what those look like. So I'm actually going to take this out for a second. And I'm just going to get another block and I'm going to make it 3mm thick because that's the thickness of my laser cut timber or acrylic that I might be working with. I'm going to make it maybe 6mm long and I'm going to make it 3mm tall. So I've made a little tab. And what I'm going to do with that tab is I'm going to drag it up and I'm going to drag it across. And across this way until it is right there on top of my wing. And I'm going to make a copy of that. And I want one just on the bottom. Whoops. Just like that. And now I'm going to join. Is that in the middle? That's not at all in the middle. All right, put that in the middle. Now I'm going to join all of these shapes together. Lovely. Now, maybe you can see where I'm going with this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut little square notches out of these wings. And in doing that, I am going to, when it gets produced, it's going to cut the top wing out with some little holes in it. And it's going to cut these brace pieces out and they're going to lock in perfectly. So, go back to my front view. Move that back into my plane. And then what I'm going to do is make a few more and put them in my plane in the locations that I want them to be in. So this one over here, this one over here, and this one over here. Right, now, here's the bit that sometimes confuses people a little bit. In order to make this cut out that shape, I have to turn this into a hole, and then I have to combine them together. The problem is that after I create this little hole, this part is going to disappear. So I'm going to lose it. And then I'm not going to have anything in my design, and that's going to be a bit of a pain in the butt. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to make a copy of all of this plane, and I'm going to drag it over here, and that's where I'm going to do my work. So I know that this piece is going to be 3D printed. And I also know that this wing goes all the way through. So that's not really going to work as like a part of a 3D printed design. So I'm going to have to sort of change that a little bit. I also know that this little wing here is going to need some way of joining on to this 3D printed part. So I'm going to also make a little hole in my 3D printed part for that. That's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to go on all at once. So to make that a little bit easier for myself, I don't really need this propeller hanging out here. So I might just delete that, right? Because I've got a copy over here. I haven't lost it. And this is like my unmessed with design. I always have a design going that I don't sort of hack big bits out of or mess with too much until I'm really sure that everything's sort of right. So what am I going to do? Well, let's grab these bits and let's lock them so that I don't stuff them. And then with this, well, that I'm going to need to use this wing to cut a little shape out of this 3D printed part. The tricky bit is I need to make this wing a little bit bigger if it's going to cut a hole, because if you want to put something into a hole, you have to make the hole slightly bigger than the thing that's going to fit into the hole. That's just kind of a universal law of engineering stuff. If you can drill the most perfect 10mm hole in the world, and then you have the most perfect 10mm plug to fit into that hole, and you go to put them together, you're going to have a hell of a time fitting them together because there's no gap between them. And that gap is something we call tolerance. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to bump the size up a little bit. So I'm going to make this 3.5, and I'm going to make this 141. And I don't think that actually, oh, that's the wrong dimension. So I'm going to make this 31. And that is going to give me, when I punch it through, a little bit of wiggle room. And I might move this back 0.5 of a mil, so it's perfectly centered. And that means when I punch a hole through this plain body with this part, everything's going to work really nicely. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go click, and oops, make that a hole first. Select that, combine them together. Punch that hole through there. Cool. Now I've just got rid of my wing. That's a pain in the butt. Thankfully, I have more wing. So that's why you always keep an unmessed with model. And I can just slide that across back into where it was. And there we go. I might have to move it. And I've kind of got a hole now that I can use to line that up. All right, so that's perfect. Good. So now what I'm going to do is select all of these and turn them into holes. Right, and I can use those now to cut out my little square shapes and leave me with a wing. Now there is one problem, and that is if I select this and these shapes and this, and I stick them all together, it will cut all the holes out, but it will also leave me with a top wing and a bottom wing that are sort of joined together by nothing, by thin air, but I can't move them around. Let me sort of show you what that looks like. And for some reason they're all locked. Let's unlock those. Right. So, select. And join them all together. Right, and that is going to cut out all those little holes for me. I'm going to cut them out on the bottom, but not on the top. That's quite peculiar. Why did that happen? Hold up. Oh, this shape's locked as well. All right, let's do that again. Right, there we go. Now I've got all of my pieces with my little holes in them. Now that's okay, but now I've got these two pieces that are sort of joined together, and that's a pain. If I split them, I'd like to split them by just doing this, but if I do that, I just undo all of this work that I did. So I've got to think of another sort of way to get around this. I can either do that, so take all of these, join them all together, and then do something with them later on to double them up and then chop them out. Or what I can do is I can realize that in this scenario, this wing and this wing are exactly the same shape. And so why do I need to do the same thing on both wings? Right, I can just do this. Right. Punch that through. Here's my wing. Why don't I make some copies of that? I'm going to need that later on. Whack it back down to 0. I can use that to make a wing. Here's another one. Right, there's my two wings. That's those parts of the designs done. Great. Now, what I also need is I need to cut out 4 of these things. Control C, Control V. And let's see if I can grab that. not my knife for clicking. All right, so I need that and move that back down so it is at 0 mil. Right, like that. Move it back over here with all my other laser cut pieces. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. And there are those laser cut pieces, right? Now I would do a similar thing with the wing at the back and this little tail wing coming out of him. I'd put a little tab in here. And I would also put those over here. But let me show you, now that I've messed with it, I actually don't need the wings anymore. So I can get rid of the wings, and now my life is just a little bit simpler. And there's a random shape in there. Oh, that's where that went. All right, so what I also need to do, after I'd sort of made copies of these, I'm also gonna need to cut a little notch out of my 3D printed part to fit this wing. And so to do that, I'm just gonna make this a hole, combine it with this. There we go. All right, so that's where that little bottom wing is going to fit. So that I can 3D print. And this little guy I can 3D print. Now there's some other things that I want to do. I want to put some wheels on this, and I also want a space for my electric motor that's going to turn my little propeller around. So what I would need to do is actually measure my electric motor and figure out what size that is. I haven't got one with me, so I'm just going to guess. So I'm going to make a bit of a guess that I've got an electric motor that is 26 mil. By about 20. And what I want to do as well is I want to make this quite deep because I want to fit a bunch of things in this plane. So I might leave that at 65, make that 26, and I'm going to put this in the front of this plane. Cool, perfect. Select both of those, combine them, and there's the space for my electric motor. Now, just thinking for a second, if I want to 3D print this shape, there's a bit of a problem here. And that problem is that now I have kind of a nasty overhang here. So if we were to print this from looking at it like this, where this surface here is the bottom, then the nozzle is going to go up like this. It's going to be fine. It's going to move up the sides. That's going to be fine. And then it's going to get to probably about this point when it's trying to sort of move between here and here. And there's nothing supporting that material. And so it's going to squeeze out a whole bunch of plastic and not build anything. And that might, you know, best case scenario, it'll look yucky. Worst case scenario, it's going to stuff our design. And so the easiest way to fix that is when it's printed, don't print it like that. Print it like that. All right. Now, there's a little overhang there. And if you've spotted that, yep, you're dead right. But that little overhang is only a couple of millimeters. And little overhangs like that, we can actually manage just fine, or the printer can actually manage just fine. It's the same thing with my little person. I made these little earmuffs so that they only stuck out a very small amount, because that's an overhang that the printer can actually deal with. Same thing with these goggles, right? They only poke out from the circle that is the head by about 1 millimeter. So they're going to be fine as well. So I'm going to keep working on this, and I'm going to get it finished, and hopefully you'll be able to see it when it's done. Hopefully that was helpful. It gives you a bit of an idea, I hope, in how to think about using more than one manufacturing technique to get a project done, how to think about, okay, these things need to be designed differently and arranged differently for different manufacturing techniques, whether that's laser, whether that's 3D printer, or whether it's some other technique that you've decided to use on your own, and sort of how to employ or how to think through that process and create something that's going to be, really successful. Cool. See ya.